The Drum Candy Podcast is brought to you by Drum Factory Direct.
Hey folks, Thomas Wen back with you once again for Drum Factory Direct. Thanks so much for joining us today. Today we are going to be introducing a brand new series that we are calling simply Portraits in Jazz. For this series, we're going to take just a little bit of your time to introduce you to some of the most important and influential drummers in jazz and Black American music. These are drummers that not only help to shape the music, but also help to shape how all of us play the drums today. And I'm very happy to say that we are going to be getting some help from one of the best in the business. The great drummer, historian, and educator Kenny Washington will be joining us for each of these episodes to offer some of his thoughts on these masters, as well as some of his favorite recordings to check them out on. For this first episode of Portraits in Jazz, we are going to focus on one of the most important of the early jazz drummers, the great Warren "Baby" Dodds. Baby Dodds was born Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1898, in the great city of New Orleans, Louisiana. And he got started playing drums pretty young, and along with his older clarinet-playing brother, Johnny Dodds, both of these young men grew up in this incredible musical and cultural mecca. By the time Baby Dodds was 16 or 17, he had already played with many of the best bands in New Orleans. Now, these were bands that would play for parades, they would play early jazz, many times they would play for dances where they would be required to play all kinds of different tempos and rhythms for the dancers. This was a fantastic foundation for Baby Dodds as a musician, and he also got some tutelage from two of the older early New Orleans drummers, Dave Perkins and Louis Cottrell. Now, in 1918, Baby Dodds' career kind of leveled up a little bit when he was hired by band leader Fate Marable to play on some of the riverboats that sailed in and out of New Orleans on the Mississippi River. And many times on these riverboat gigs, a teenage Louis Armstrong would be in the band along with Baby Dodds. Louis Armstrong will figure very prominently throughout the 1920s in Baby Dodds' career. After leaving Fate Marable's band and New Orleans, Baby Dodds eventually found himself out on the West Coast, where he joined the band of another great New Orleanian jazz master, cornetist and band leader Joe King Oliver. And Baby Dodds would make his way back east to Chicago, where he would settle with Joe King Oliver and his Creole Jazz Band. And in April of 1923, this group would go into the recording studio for Jeanette Records and make some really important early jazz records. And at this time, the great Louis Armstrong was playing second cornet in the band. Joe King Oliver had called him up to Chicago to join the group. Now, throughout the 1920s, Baby Dodds would continue to perform and record with some of the best of this new music. He would record with Jelly Roll Morton's Hot Peppers, as well as Louis Armstrong's Hot Seven, and many, many others. Now, for more on Baby Dodds and some other great recordings to check out, here's Kenny Washington.
Well, I think for me, the record that he made that came out on the Folkways label, I think it was called the Talking Drums.
Yep.
You know, where he's explaining the drums, and you can hear that with Baby Dodds, you know, he was thinking about music even back then, way before Max Roach. But the fascinating thing about Baby Dodds is guys like him, there's others, Zooty Singleton, of course, Paul Barberin and guys like that. But the thing that's interesting is they are the creators of jazz drumming, period. I mean, they had such beautiful technique, man. I mean, because they had teachers that played in symphony orchestras and symphonic bands and things like that. There was no such thing as jazz as we know it. So what's fascinating about Baby Dodds is like, he created that. He created this whole thing of jazz and you know, playing what I call the backward cymbal beat on the snare drum, you know, and all the great things that he did play, you know, in New Orleans. But at the same time, not only that, I think one of the things that's great about him is his technique. If you listen to that record, those rolls are to die for. I mean, those rolls that he plays demonstrating the different, you know, the talking drums and all these drum solos, those rolls are so smooth, man. I mean, to me, that's what I'm trying to get to.
The 1946 recording on the Folkways label that Kenny was talking about, talking and drum solos, is indeed one of the best documents we have of Baby Dodds doing his thing. It's really great to listen to. Another thing to check out, especially on the recordings that he made in the mid and late 1920s with Louis Armstrong and Jelly Roll Morton in particular, check out how Baby Dodds uses the cymbals. Now back then, it was mainly one or two small cymbals that were mounted on the bass drum. Check out how he uses the cymbals, especially how he plays and chokes the cymbals to give the music different effect, color, and accents. It's really something. Baby Dodds was one of the first drummers to change how he would play behind each individual soloist. He could hear that all these musicians had their own unique personalities and styles, so he would change how he would play behind their improvisations to help match what they were doing musically. It's really something to hear. Now, before we go, we're going to go back to Kenny and listen to him talk about another one of his favorite recordings that Baby Dodds is on. These are from 1940 on the RCA Victor label with Sidney Bechet and his New Orleans Feet Warmers. Here's Kenny again.
The recordings that he made with Sidney Bechet for RCA Victor, those are great too, you know. And you can hear how he's, you know, the different things that he plays with the wood block and on the snare drum, you know, playing in an ensemble situation. And you can really hear the drums. You know, you can really hear the drums on a recording like that. So that's another one of the recordings that I like with Baby Dodds.
Throughout the 1920s and into the 1930s, Baby Dodds had a profound effect and influence on many of the young drummers of that day, including George Wettling, Ray Baduch, Davy Tuff, and even Gene Krupa. I'd like to thank Kenny Washington for joining us today, and to listen to some of this music that we've been talking about on this episode, check out the description below where you can find links to a lot of this music. And as always, I'd love to hear what you think about this music in the comments. Let me know what some of your favorite Baby Dodds recordings are and why. I look forward to hearing from you. That's going to do it for this first episode of Portraits in Jazz. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, stay safe and stay close to the music. See you next time.